Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'm very happy to have my colleague, Attorney Vera Zambrano, back with us on the show. He's an expert in international family law. He has as well two law firms, one in Chicago and one in Naples, Florida. And he's done hundreds of cases in, all the aspects of family law. And yes, I'm very happy that you're back, Russell. Thank you so much, and I hope you had a great week.
I'm glad to be back. I had a wonderful week. Thank you.
Great. So this episode, right, we're going to cover a little bit about different topics, very important topic when it comes to family law. One is the asset division, right? When people hear about, how our assets split in a divorce, mediation, and also alimony, which is spousal support and also child alimony, right? So we want to talk a little bit about, first of all, we jump right into the asset division. What do people think about when they hear the word asset division? What is it? And are there some differences in the states of Florida and Illinois?
There is. So all asset division in almost all states, as far as I'm aware, starts with the question of whether an asset is marital or non-marital. And typically that distinction means, was the asset acquired or earned before the marriage or after the marriage? If it's before the marriage, then the courts have no authority to split that asset. They presume that it belonged to you before, you can keep it after. It's usually what most prenups say too. Prenups usually just repeat the law. But the issues that are marital, if you earned something and saved it during the marriage, that's going to be presumed to be the result of marital efforts and therefore should be split maritally. Different jurisdictions have different policies. For example, in Illinois, they do something called equitable distribution, which means we're going to divide this the way it's fair. So if you're a little old widow or widower, like a little old person, and you never worked, and your spouse is still busy flying private jet planes and is making tons of money, a judge is going to say, I'm not going to split this 50-50. I'm going to give the person who has no capacity to work more than 50, 60, 70 maybe, but it's almost never like 100 or even 80 or anything close to that. In Florida, there's no choice. It has to be 50-50, and the court has to make a distinct finding of why it wouldn't be 50-50. And it hardly ever does because courts don't want to open themselves up to be appealed. So I get many people who live in Illinois part of the year and part of the year in Florida, and we go through all this analysis to see what would be the most favorable statutory regime under which you could file for divorce. And it matters for sure.
Yes, so perfect. So it's very similar overseas as well. So that's why I advise anyone, no matter if they're living in the States or in Europe, right, that to get a prenup or at least a postnup, because it will secure both parties, not actually the one who earns more or has more. It could also happen that the one who is probably not working or not working as much, not earning as much, could also inherit, right, during the marriage. So, and the other person might not, right? That could also make a big difference if you don't have a prenup and then you have, some changes in the relationship in the marriage, then can also, draw a completely different picture, right? What would you say about people who say, well, we're very in common about this. We don't need a prenup, or we don't even need to discuss it. What would you tell them to try to convince them in a polite way to please get a prenup?
I would tell them they already have a prenup. If they're in Illinois, the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act is their prenup. They get to use the one-size-fits-all prenup that everyone else in Illinois uses if they get divorced. So look out a window and look at the guy walking across the street. You're going to use the same prenup that he used. That seems stupid to me. It seems like you'd want to have something that's specifically crafted, especially considering that the prenup will have a choice of law, which will determine what laws of what state you're going to be in. Because if you're moving around, not just to different countries, but to different states, these different statutory regimes are going to affect your divorce. And maybe you want to lock in right now in the state that you're in right now so that you'll be familiar with what will happen if, God forbid, you do go to court.
Yes, like very, very important, right? So what would you say is, when it comes to asset division, is equitable distribution versus equal distribution? Because a lot of people don't understand, the difference.
Yeah. So equitable distribution is where the court considers everything. And when they say everything, I really mean that one party has a much higher income or has non-marital assets that are much higher. And so then the judge says, yeah, I get it. Like you got a big inheritance and you make $500,000 a year, but your wife, she doesn't, and you're just leaving her with half the assets. And the assets are because you're rich people spend a lot of money. That doesn't mean they have a lot of money. And if she's left with just maybe a house and half a 401k, a judge might say, no, 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 we're going to do this equitably. And that means I'm giving her the whole house and I'm giving her more than 50% of the 401k so that she has at least something when she retires. And that's equitable. The equal distribution regime, which is what Florida's under, is they're like, sorry, it's 50-50. And you better have a damn good reason to say it's not 50-50. And good luck me adopting that reason because that's just an invitation for me to get appealed. And I don't think I want to do that.
Yes. So how many, like what you just scratched on a little bit, how many divorces actually go to appeal, go to court of appeals?
Oh, to appeal, like a fraction of a percent.
Yes.
Um,
Why is that? Because when people think, well, I can appeal, right? I always have the right to appeal. In civil court, in criminal court, it happens a lot, right? Why does it not happen that much or that often in family law?
because 95 to 98% of family law cases are settled. And if you settle something, you waive your right to appeal because you've agreed.
Yes.
So there's hardly any appeals, and the appeals that do happen are so convoluted because remember, family law is not very deep. Like it does, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to get it, but it's extremely broad. So there's probably 20 different issues that were floating around. Whereas, like in a criminal case, it's like, did the cop really know, have probable cause that I had a gun or something like that? It's never that simple in family law. It's like, well, I had 10 accounts. Some of them were marital, not a marital. The court considered this. Was that fair? And if it was fair, was it so unfair as to be required an appeal? Most people have a horrible time wrapping their mind around it. And let's be honest, divorce is not pleasant. Why would someone pay good money to relive the same thing?
Yes, of course, because a lot of people don't understand. They say, well, I'm not happy with the outcome of my divorce. So a lot of people, I'm telling people, you cannot go into the divorce and come out as the winner because you get divorced. That is also already not a win, right? So for both parties, even if one party initiates the divorce, you will still not be the winner, right? When you come out, you're divorced, you have to deal with a lot of issues. You have to probably deal with co-parenting. You have to, there are a lot of things that, make it even more difficult life after divorce, right? Than before. So you both have to come, out as best as possible, right? You should settle if you can, right? It makes it a lot easier, a lot less expensive because you don't have to pay that much for the attorney, right? Because as most attorneys, they charge an hourly fee, right? Of course, they're not going to charge one lump sum, or they charge an hourly fee. So it gets really, really expensive, right? If you need a good attorney, right, and not just one attorney, then it's getting very expensive too for most people. So, but a lot of people think settlement needs the same as mediation. What would you say about that? Like, is it the same? What are the differences?
Well, it's getting there because mediation is a process that's it's not necessarily it's not mandatory in Illinois when it comes there's children's issues. It's encouraged if there's children's issues, but it's not mandatory. In Florida, it is absolutely mandatory if there's children, and it's highly, highly encouraged for financial issues. Whereas in Illinois, we almost never use it for financial issues. I think it's fantastic, but I only think it's fantastic if you have what's called five-way mediation. That means you're here, your spouse is there, your spouse is you and your attorney, your spouse's attorney, and then there's the mediator in the middle. Now, a mediator, they are like a real estate agent. They do not care what kind of house you buy. They just want you to buy a house. So the mediator will go back and forth between the two groups and will try to find out how do I get them to buy into this deal. But the deal that the mediator proposes might not be the ideal deal for either person. That's why you have to have an attorney there to say, I wouldn't accept that because you'd probably get a better deal in court. Or I would accept that because you're actually getting away with something you wouldn't get in court. And so I found that to be incredibly powerful. And I try to recommend five-way mediation to those who can afford it. And it's required in Florida, so you got to do it anyways. And we get really good results. But so I'm pro mediation, but I don't want everybody to just sit around. We don't think we're all just sitting around singing Kumbaya. It's not like that at all. Like people walk out, people get angry, people yell, and it's actually a venue where you can do all of those things because you sure can't do any of those in court.
Yes. So I'm also a huge fan of mediation, but a lot of clients don't understand. They say, well, you want to, you should file for a divorce for me, right? And they don't understand that you come back into a room that is not a courtroom and you get, together to find a solution, right? Most clients, you have to convince them, you have to tell them what it is. and that it's actually in their benefit for their good, right? In most cases, they get better results in mediation than they would get in court, right? And a lot of clients
Mhm.
like are not very familiar with that, so you have to do your work in advance as an attorney to try to convince them to at least for attempting to do it, because it also in Europe it's not mandatory, so it's optional. But that makes it harder if people say, well, if it's not stated in the law that I need it, why should I do that, right? If it's I can't just file for divorce and fight about everything. If there's no prenup, I want to fight about everything, right? So it's difficult, but if it's like in Florida, if it's mandatory, then you need to do it, right? You have to go through it, and it gives you even better cards.
It does, at least, and it also gives you a preview. It
Yes.
also eliminates a lot of discovery issues because it also turns into a global discovery conference about like, hey, if you want me to come to a deal, like I have to see all of your uh, retirement accounts, or if you want me to come to a deal, I have to see what all your income is. And typical people, typically who didn't want to turn it over before, something like, I want this deal to happen. I'm not sitting in this room for 8 hours. So yes, I will finally load it up on my phone and show you the documents you've been asking for all these months. And so that's a side benefit that closes deals, hopefully.
Yes, yes. So very interesting topic. Like we have to, get deeper into that. But at first, as the last point, I want to also talk a little bit about alimony, right?
Yeah,
People hear alimony. What is included? Is it just about the child, right, or the
yeah.
children in a divorce case? Is it also about the spousal support? How long do people usually? It depends a lot about where you live in the United States, especially, right? Um, what is your take on alimony, on spousal support on child? Mhm.
In Illinois, we do a formula. It's 1/3 net of the big earner's income, less 25% net of the small earner's income. And the small earner can never, with alimony and their income, make more than 40% of the total.
Yes.
And it's pretty fair. When like most of the times I've seen it, I've never been like, that doesn't make sense. Almost always it's like, yeah, that kind of works. In Florida, they say, um, all right, how much does the big earner make? And then how much money do they have left over? So if a guy had uh, $1 million a year and he was only really his real expenses were after taxes were 500,000, then there's like, oh, there's another $500,000 you could pay out to her. And then the not necessarily to be a woman, the other spouse would say, well, now suddenly I've got all these expenses. And so I need to get as much of that half as possible. And it
Yes.
creates the same bad incentive for the guy because the guy who's making 1 million will be like, oh, matter of fact, I have $990,000 of expenses. They're all legitimate. And here's how I can prove them that they are. And then the other spouse will be like, well, how am I supposed to get paid? Because you only have $10,000 left.
Yes.
And the other side will be like, well, yeah, because it encourages games playing. And
Yes.
I
Oh,
think and
yes.
I don't like it. I don't like it. And then the second aspect is how long it lasts for. And in Illinois, we do a straight formula based on how long accelerates on a parabolic
Mhm.
curve to say that, like, well, the longer you've been together, the longer you'll have to pay somebody alimony, which does make sense. And in Florida, it kind of works the same way, but there's more leeway for the judge. And there's a lot of different types of alimony because they've said, well, we're going to give you this much money, but then we
Mhm.
think you should be on your feet in 4 years, so then it's going to drop. And then we're going to give you this much money to maintain yourself, but we want you to check in to see if you are actually improving your life. And that to me feels not constructive for either party because again, it creates bad incentives. The person who's getting the money from alimony is not going to want to get the world's greatest job that's going to relieve their alimony payments. And the person who's paying alimony is going to be constantly bothering the person who's receiving the alimony to see, like, what did you do with your life? And when
Yes.
they should be totally separate from each other.
Yes. Totally. And what would you tell a client, recommend a client if the client obviously, right, earns a lot more than the opposite party? What would you recommend to get the best out of the case, or to get the best through it?
You see, easy. You pay up front. And here's how you can do it. And it's going to save you money twice. People are addicted to having money right now. The average person, if you offered them $2 tomorrow or $1 today, will take the dollar today. And I'm sure their spouse is very similar. So do that. And then here's the best part. If it's part of a transfer of assets due to the divorce, it's tax free. But if
Yes.
it's out of alimony, you have to pay taxes on the money that you're paying to your ex. So you might be paying $1,000 a month. No, you're really paying 1,500 or whatever your tax rate is.
Yes, yes. So that's a very good recommendation. That's also, we give clients all the time to say, look, you have to think about it, right? You do you want to be smart, or do you want to, just be stubborn right now? And then, you'll get, punished by the court eventually, right? Because people always say, oh, it's so unfair, and they don't see the whole picture. Also, whatever they set up in their own marriage, when they tell their spouse, please stay home, don't go out, don't earn money. Like, they set up that marriage, right? They set up this frame, and
Yeah.
this becomes a tradition, and then it's not unfair anymore. If the judge eventually says in the end, 10 years in, right, in the marriage, well, the husband has to pay that much amount to the wife because she never worked, and then the husband always says, well, she could work, but the husband doesn't understand that he set this tradition, right? He told the woman to stay at home, to take care of the kids, to not work. And if he encouraged her to partially work, or if they got another agreement
Yeah.
in the marriage, they would both earn. No one had to really pay a lot of alimony in the end, right?
And it's a silly argument anyways, because usually they say, well, she should work. Work at what? And then because we're going to impute money to her anyways about what she would be making if she wasn't working.
Yes.
And so then if she was working, like what did you expect her to become? A rocket scientist over the last 10 years?
Yes.
No, she would have been working at the same boutique you found her in. And
Yes.
it's not, and it just doesn't impact things as much as you'd think.
Yes, totally. And what about child alimony, right? So I don't know if you came across that in Florida last year. At least last year, they established a lot of time sharing models. So
Yeah,
that's what, like, pro fathers actually, right?
it
Like,
is very much so.
it's very good. It's a very good development for fathers. So, because now it says the case should be 50-50, the time should be shared 50-50 with the child between father and mother. So the mom cannot say anymore, well, I have the kid anyways, right? And the father has to
Mhm.
pay me child support when they split. No, it's not that easy anymore, right? Now, because the father should make enough time for the kid, so no parent would pay child support actually to the other parent, right?
Yeah,
And that changed a lot, right? It changed like almost every divorce case with kids. What do you think
yeah.
about that development?
Well, I don't disagree with the 50-50 because I think it's a better starting point than the alternative, which is it's not stated, but it's dad gets every other weekend, and then he builds up from there. But it also, it gives dad enough room, like frankly, to succeed or fail. And if he isn't able to, live up to his responsibilities, then has to start paying more in child support.
Huh?
But child support it's never enough to live on.
Yeah.
So it's the I either party, and it's never enough to really, I think, impact your finances that much. So I don't think it's the end all be all. If you have a child support and an alimony award, yeah, maybe that's a different story. But I think it's kind of a MacGuffin. I don't think it really matters because if you're paying an extra couple $100 a month, a week, or a month, just figure out a way to make more than that. Ask your boss for a raise.
Yeah. So what about Illinois? So how does it work there?
Oh, we say that there's a formula set based on tables. It's very similar to Florida, but we don't have a 50-50 presumption. It usually is the presumption that they will do whatever the parties were doing when they were split up. And so a lot of guys foolishly are like, I'll get an apartment downtown and I'll have a bunch of girlfriends. And then they realize, no, now they are only getting to be every other weekend, and they'll have to pay child support. And child support only gets reduced if you have more than 40% of the total days. And I can't emphasize, if you do, it is so difficult to get past that 40% because the problem is seven, the number of days in a week, that's a prime number.
Yes.
So even you'd have to be at 6 out of 14 to be over the 40%.
Yes.
And it's just like not going to happen. And if you're at 5, like guess what? It's like you're still not at 40% then. So what was the point? So at any rate, my point is most people should just say, figure out what time you want with your kids in reality and just live with the child support that comes from the rules.
Yes. Just as a little, follow-up question. What about the children in the divorce case? Do they have anything to say? Is there anything that a judge will listen to the kids? What age? Are there any differences between Florida and Illinois?
In Illinois, we usually appoint, if there's a custody issue, a guardian ad litem. And the phrase we use is children can have a voice, but not a choice. So they can express what they want, and the guardian ad litem will consider that when they make recommendations. The guardian ad litem turns into sort of a glorified social worker that recommends to the judge because the judge doesn't have time to learn about the inner lives of hundreds of families and their children. And then in Florida, the 50-50 default kind of makes it so that if you want 50-50, you're probably going to get it. And then they will enforce hearsay rules, and the kids really don't have a voice. So if mom or dad says, well, the kids really want to stay with me, the other attorney would be like, objection, hearsay. How, like, you can't get the kid would have to be in here to testify. And every Florida judge will tell you, I'm never letting a kid into their parents' divorce trial. So good luck with that.
Yes, like it's very similar in overseas in Europe and especially Germany, very, very similar. So because even like when the child is 13, that's like the golden number, 13, that someone can actually be heard, and the judge will take into consideration what the kid, the minor, like the teenager at that point says, but they will not make it their decision. They will also talk about to the guardian. They will talk to social workers if necessary. But they will say, okay, the child could also be manipulated, right? How do I know that the child expresses his or her own will and not the mom's or the dad's? So that's very, it's not that firm, right? When the child is there, it can only be taken as as something additional for the judge to make a decision, but it's definitely not a choice of the kid. Yes.
It isn't. Like, what do kids want to eat every day? Ice cream. Are you going to give them ice cream every day? Come on.
Yes, exactly. If you leave choices up to a kid, it doesn't matter if it's a teenager or a younger kid, right? They're going to say they're going to choose something that is probably not in the best for them and not healthy, right?
Yeah, always, yeah.
What is just fun and what is just like for the actual current fun and not looking at the future, right? What impact it could have. So they choose also when it comes to divorce or separation even already. The moms and the dads are trying to challenge sometimes each other with gifting, right? With gifting the kid. We're saying like, if you come with me, I'm giving you this, I'm giving you a new dog, I'm getting you, right? And then the kid is also in between, right? And the kid obviously loves mom and dad the same way. So they would not want to make a decision. I want to live with mom or dad. So what you're doing when you take a child, what we have a lot in our cases, they say, I want my child to go to court because he wants to live with me. And I tell them we should not do that, right? Because once we do that and the judge sees the child is being manipulated, or even if not, the child will have, a longer need to even have to go through therapy, right? At one point, because you drag on a child to the courtroom or to talk to a judge about, where do you want to live with? Who do you want to live with in the future? And the child doesn't want to make a choice pro dad or pro mom, right? So obviously what you're doing, you're just putting the problem on the child and say, you have to solve it. You have to speak up where, what future looks like, right? And it's not fair. It's not fair to the child because it's not an adult yet, right? You can't put adult decisions on a kid's back. So I don't know if you had ever that problem that clients came to you said, I want my child to tell everyone that what they told me correct, right?
Yeah, I've found that children are very unreliable narrators. They really want both parents to love them. So they will say in front of dad, oh, no, I love spending time with dad. And then they'll say in front of mom, like, oh, not really. I'd rather be with mom. That's natural and is frankly cruel and really misconceived to put a child in that position. Kids don't get to make choices. I'm not even sure they should have a voice that often because then it just puts them in between their parents, which is exactly the worst thing that happens in a divorce.
Yes, yes. Perfect. We just wanted to dive quick into this topic. Of course, there's a lot more to cover, right? It's just we could talk about it for hours or even for days only about those topics. But if people say, okay, that's exactly my case, I need someone, it's about divorce, it's about children, it's about, asset division, how can they get a hold of you?
Oh, they can call me they can go to my website, actually, preferable to learn more about me. It's rdklegal.com. My Florida website is divorceattorneynaplesfl.com. And if they want to reach out to me directly, they can call my cell. No, they call my office at 773-334-6311.
Okay, perfect. Do you have anything else regarding those topics that you want to just give, clients, new clients, existing clients as a recommendation, as a tip?
Well, I would, yeah, Google anything about Illinois divorce, and I will be one of the first three things that comes up where I explain it. I have over 700 articles that I've personally written and I update because I read the appeals every week, and I will likely, if I don't have the answer for what you're looking for, I'll have the structure of how you can understand the situation that you're trying to grasp, and read those before you call me because those are really what I'm all about. If I don't pretend to know everything, but I'd like to meet someone who knows more than me.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much, Russell. That was an amazing talk today. We'll catch up later, right? And
Sure.
yes, we want to just encourage everyone who listened today. Contact him. He knows a lot, if not everything, about international family law. Contact him for his Illinois office in Chicago, right? Or in Naples, Florida. So he's licensed in 2 states. He has 2 law firms, right? And he will represent you with all of his experience. Thank you so much for joining and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.